Keep watching The Politics every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on New York Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hey, welcome everybody to Foreign Policy Review. It's me, Billy Bob, coming live to you from my vacation here in Hawaii. Today we have Matt Ehret, and we are very happy to have him. He is, I think he's in Canada at the moment, but he is a author and geopolitical analyst. I ran into him on the email. I'm on an email list with Jeff Brown's China Writers Group. So he specializes in China, but he has a very wide range of knowledge, and we're gonna just have a discussion today. What's interesting to me is that me and Ben, we come at everything from an ideological perspective of Marxism and communism, and Matt has a little bit of a different approach, but the interesting thing is we come to the same conclusions on the big geopolitical issues. So I think that's fascinating that we can come look at reality from two different ideological perspectives and arrive at the same result. So that's something we can definitely discuss today. But I wanted to throw it over to Matt, and Matt's going to introduce himself. He's going to talk about all the many books he's written and different projects he's a part of. So Matt, thanks so much for coming on. You're a stand-up guy, and you were just on Crosstalk, RT's Crosstalk. Everybody knows that. But you want to tell us some more about yourself?
Yeah, Billy Bob, thank you very much for having me on. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you, everybody. And I'm really happy to be here talking with you guys. And yeah, I've been friends with Jeff Brown for a while. His China Writers Group is a lot of fun. All sorts of really great people who are just coming at, like you said, the same general mode of thinking about solutions and recognizing ultimately the same problems that are confronting all of us, despite our ideological lens that we're trying to make sense of or piece together elements from this world. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very sure. This conversation. I myself am the editor-in-chief and founder of the Canadian Patriot Review. It's a geopolitical magazine that I set up in 2012. Coming out of that work on sort of Canadian history, the geopolitical economic analysis of the Canadian banking system, I published first a series of 4 books called The Untold History of Canada, followed up by a new series of 4 books that I've co-authored with my wife, Cynthia, who's another author with me, over at Strategic Culture Foundation in Russia. It's called The Clash of the Two Americas. I'm a senior fellow of the American University in Moscow that's run by a Russian physicist and former Soviet dissident named Dr. Edward Lazansky. So that's a bit of a think tank that I do on the side. And recently, my wife and we founded an organization called the Rising Tide Foundation too. So we got a lot of hats that we wear, but ultimately the mission is the same: stop feudalism and try to avoid a dark age.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and it's our pleasure to have you. So let's, what do you think? I mean, to start things off, one interesting, reality is that, if you look in the Western echo chamber, there are no dissenting opinions, right? There is uniformity about how we're supposed to process and understand, what's going on in Ukraine and just geopolitical events in general. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there is not any alternative perspectives being offered, on any of the mainstream media platforms?
Oh, well, that's a nice broad opening question, and I think there's a lot of ways of looking at that, but I think the simplest way to answer that is just simply that we have here in the free and democratic rules-based international order, aka NATO Five Eyes cage, as I like to call it, we have a push towards an agenda which is longstanding. It's not a new agenda that just emerged onto the scene in the last few years. It's been something which has been creeping and crawling for the past, I would say, since World War II. which is to do what failed to happen in 1922, in 1933, in 1940, in the 1940s, which is establish a post-nation state fascist world order founded upon a master class of elites that want to impose, without any troublesome democratic institutions resisting or protecting the people of this world. They just want to be able to impose their will from the top onto the system in some form of a unipolar hegemonic fashion under a new Roman Empire, which has been very romanticized and idealized by different figures. You know, we've seen examples of like Cecil Rhodes and Milner choosing, of all names, for their secret society, the Round Table movement. Like, why the Round Table? Well, they've got a romanticized idea of medievalism, of this idea of returning back to the pre-Renaissance period of feudalism, when, you know, the knights and the nobles knew their roles and as a master class in their castles, and the peasants were just good talking cows chewing their cud without, you know, overstepping the boundary conditions given to them by the elites. And they just love this, but maybe with a more technocratic sort of spin today with modern technology to help them in that process with drugs and video games, like Yuval Harari points out as the best way to control the useless class that's now emerging with the fourth industrial revolution. So it's got maybe a technological spin, but they really want to do what they failed to do when they tried really hard in the early 20s to get a one world government, or sort of a great reset agenda under the League of Nations with the eugenics religion as a cult from the top. They tried in the 30s with this bankers dictatorship with the London Conference to solve the Great Depression that they ironically also created in 29. That failed then, and they tried it again with their, Nazi, fascist, hardcore sledgehammer, which again didn't work out the way that these, wannabe gods of Olympus had intended. And so they've taken a little bit more of a longer term approach after World War II to have a more slow decay from within as part of their inducing of their victim states to destroy themselves willfully, which is what we've been doing now for the past 60 years, especially since globalization, mass liberalization, deregulation was unleashed in the early 70s under Kissinger, the whole Trilateral Commission takeover of the US government. It's been just a complete dismantling of the industrial base of America, the actual viable part of the real economy that made capitalism viable and functional was that it was producing things that were real in the real world, and money was tied to that. That was severed in the early 70s, and we went into a Alice in Wonderland fantasy world of building bubble upon bubble upon bubble with no reality. And now we're sitting on the biggest time bomb that's being detonated. And the only problem is, Russia, China, India, like these major civilizational forces are all saying no, they don't want to play along with the script anymore. And those who are in the NATO cage are all being expected to walk in lockstep, despite the fact that the population en masse, whether German, whether American, they don't want World War III. They just want to have jobs. They want to have affordable gas, energy. They don't want to freeze to death. They don't want to starve. They don't want to eat bugs. They want to own things and still be happy, which runs in contradiction to the types of ideologues and death cultists as I think they really are, managing the special steering committees at Davos or Bilderberg, that are trying to run roughshod over humanity.
So you're suggesting that we don't have the free democracy and the freedom of speech that we tell ourselves we do, that there's something else going on. It's basically a dictatorship of the elites, and they're going to push the agendas down our throats using their propaganda apparatus, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's exactly where me and Ben end up from our communism, and I'm sure Carlo ends up in a very similar place with his nihilism. No, sorry, Carlo, you're not a nihilist. Not.
He's not.
No, I mean, you're humanitarian. I mean, I believe people have an impulse, an Epicurean impulse. And if you take a close look at traditional Epicureanism, especially Roman history, it was possible because the Epicureans were wealthy people who lived outside of Rome and had many slaves to do their bidding. So it's essentially a feudalism. And if you're at the top of the the pyramid, you could live an Epicurean life. You could discuss the Greeks, and you could eat fine, foods and that sort of thing. It seemed to me, and my wife, I'll throw my wife in this because she's really behind this idea, is that she thought, and I think to us rightly so to a certain degree, that the middle class life that we were living here in the United States, and even people like us whose ambitions were not monetary, were very comfortable. It's very comfortable, and then but with growing up during the Vietnam War, we became conscious that this I mean, formidable years in college and high school, that this was built on a kind of international feudal structure, where the United States was stealing everything from everyone else, so that it could become an Epicurean paradise to a certain degree, and not entirely, but to a certain degree, and Rosalie, my wife, felt like, well, that will be enough. We can project that around the world, then we can, if everyone can be living this kind of middle class existence, like the Chinese are beginning to develop now in their own country, in a totally different context, that there will be a kind of universal peace and happiness. But the punchline is whether I think the point we have to decide is whether or not it's necessary to exploit the world to maintain Europe and the United States, or whether or not there can be some consensus Epicurean existence for the entire world. I think the Chinese, especially the Chinese, with their Belt and Road Initiative, have suggested, well, perhaps there can be, and that's where I stand. I don't have any dog in the fight with the Stalinists and the Trotskyites or any of you guys. You go ahead and do that. Look, I've tried reading that. I've tried reading everything I thought was relevant, and some things I just can't abide, and other things obviously have made a great impression on me, which is one of the reasons I'm so hostile toward people like Rockhill, for example. So
Yeah.
that's my position. Anyway.
What about you, Ben?
I was just going to say that you can go the Stalinist with all that route, but it's the Soviet world, or just the Russian world, the word mir, both means world and it means peace. They named space stations after this thing that they were after, but they weren't allowed. But I think Carlo said something interesting, that in order to defend US and European interest, I don't think anybody's defending European interest at the moment. I think the deindustrialization that America has already had is now being forced on Europe. And it's even scarier here that the media voice is just monolithic. It doesn't matter what pain you feel. It doesn't matter what price you pay for things. It's Putin's got to pay. Yeah. And I think they thought they were going to get, a part of the loot, once Russia is dismantled. But no, they're not being actually attacked by Russia. I mean, the United States is the one doing the disemboweling. I mean, the mighty Wurlitzer, I think, was prisoner. I don't remember the CIA guy. Wisner. Wasn't he the mighty Wurlitzer?
Frank,
thank you.
He killed himself. Another one that committed suicide.
Yeah, to have a monolithic voice in world media by putting our friends in there. I mean, in the digital world, it's easy. You just silence out anything else. And there are people like this, but, we don't get the spread or the reach of anyone else. And it's scary. In Hungary, Eastern Europe, shithole country, Middle Europe, the most corrupt country, apparently the EU has said, now that they don't like Orban, is different because we have two medias, government and opposition, and we trust neither. But when I go west, when I look at Germany, when I look at England, it's just the same official said, the same Kiev official said oftentimes. And it's just one monolithic voice.
And I like the fact that Carlo just pointed out that Frank Wisner committed suicide. I think that's interesting, because I think that when you get into the deep psychology of some of these upper level managers of this beast, there's a real rot of the soul that I think there's a profound sickness in the soul that manifests itself I would think that many of these creatures have very bad dreams, that their subconscious is really not at ease with their the chosen identity and role that they've given to themselves to be useful tools to this evil, corrupt beast.
Joe McCarthy drank himself to death. Just want to inject that there, you know.
Yeah. They say Lyndon Johnson as well largely committed suicide in some ways by just eating himself to death and just completely letting go. He just like a lot of these creatures, they just not that I would put Lyndon Johnson at that high level of an intellect who would be like aware of what he was doing half the time. But all that to say, there's something important about that, because a lot of people they attribute too much, I think, power and self-control to the wannabe gods of Olympus that want to be perceived as being these all-powerful, mighty forces that you can't even bother contending with. So don't even bother trying, slave, to deal with the immortals when you're just a mortal, lowly scum. You know, so you got this whole like thing where we give them more value and more power than they actually deserve. The reality is that they're a dysfunctional inbred hillbilly class at the top with a bunch of little like house slaves that they just use pathetically to enforce a very unnatural mode of existence onto the victims and onto themselves, onto their own progeny. You know, you just hear what people like Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley had to go through in their educational process when they were youth. They had a third brother who committed suicide. And it's abuse, it's grooming, it's disgusting what they do to their kids that then go on to become the abusers of of humanity later on. It's wrong.
Yeah, Alan Dulles is a psychopath in his own. I mean, he learned to love it. What you're talking about never fazed him, not for an instant.
No, it didn't. No, him and his brother were.
They were in a class of their own.
They adapted well. But all I have to say, like Annalena Baerbock, right? I mean, she openly said, "I don't care what my constituents want. I don't care if it's going to hurt them. I want what's good for Ukraine." And this is right before she said, "Oh yeah, by the way, we're at war with Russia."
Well, that was this week's big announcement. A lot of people weren't prepared, like the Croatian president. Like, I didn't know we were at war with Russia. Can someone clarify? But please go on.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, that went really well for you like 80 years ago. Good luck with that again.
Yep.
Yeah, that was fun.
Hungary said sorry.
You mentioned, Matt, that they failed. They failed in 22, I believe you said. In the 30s, they failed. And what do you think their chances are of success this time? It seems to me that China has already won about a decade ago. Yeah. You know that they already can't do it. China's too powerful. Russia in alliance with China, like there's no way the West can overcome that. But what are your thoughts? I mean, they're going to give it their best shot. How do you see things playing out? That's another broad question, I know.
No, that's fine. Broad questions are good.
Can I also prime you with 3 pieces of news that happened like one day after the other this week? Yes. The first one was the Rand Corporation report, the one who actually did the design of what to do with the Ukraine, called Extending Russia. In 2019, they came out with a new report of avoiding a long war.
Now, how do we undo this mess we made?
Exactly. Second was the CSIS. I'm not sure what that stands for, but you know the one.
That's Gene Kirkpatrick's think tank.
Yep, and that one came out with empty bins in a wartime environment, the challenge to U.S. defense industrial base, and as it relates to China. Sorry, we're out of guns. And the third one was the IMF report on Russia's economy basically growing while Britain is still sinking, among other European nations, like in full recession. So those 3, I think they paint a very grim picture for the chances going ahead. I just wanted to prime the question.
Yeah, that's all good. Yeah. No, I agree. John Helmer just produced a really nice analysis piece on his Dances with Bears website.
I recreated his poster about the paper tigers. I loved it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, he made a point that, like he was just going through how this current crisis, this completely manufactured crisis that involves the intention that began, in one way you could say began in 2014, but in reality, this goes back much, much longer, as we all know, to destroy Russia. But 2014 was a good, singularity moment to latch onto. This crisis that was building up to create a full spectrum dominance policy around Russia's perimeter, as well as around China. this has created now an opportunity to really do the type of structural reforms that need to be done in Russia to break a lot of these like IMF affiliated liberalizers from the enjoying the power that they've been able to somehow, by some weird evil miracle, enjoy for the past 20 years. Some have been purged, some have gone to jail, some have somehow remained in a position of high influence within the Russian central banking system, within the cultural ministries. It's weird, but Helmer makes the point that you have now with this whole vectoring east, which is completely compensating for the losses, the economic losses, due to the cutoff of a lot of economic activity and trade with Europe and North America. That's all being absorbed now by India, Iran, China especially. They need to build a lot more infrastructure in the east to supply the coal, the natural gas, the pipeline, or the oil, maybe not natural gas, but the oil into the Asian markets. But it's going to happen, as well as the Arctic Silk Road. So, you have this whole new system. Anatoly Anatov, the Russian ambassador to the United States, recently made a point that this is not really about Ukraine. This is about the fight to stop the emerging multipolar world order. That's clearly the case. It's a very different paradigm of security, finance, economics, self-interest than anything we find in the NATO cage. It's very much more in conformity with a dignified human civilization, capable of replenishing itself and overcoming those limits to growth that our ignorance of the laws of nature are always and will always impose onto us. Like, we're always going to have certain limits to what we can do based upon the level of knowledge and the level of technology that we currently have and the type of relationship we have to whatever resources, which are always going to have a material finiteness. But the question is, do we have the moral fitness and creative vitality to leap over those limits all the time in order to create new knowledge, to have better technologies, have new resources that were formerly not resources when we were ignorant, as we see with the case of, like, before we discovered how to utilize oil, it was just something that angered farmers when they discovered that they had this black crap under their soil. They were like, damn it, I can't produce food in this area. All of a sudden, a decade later, after the discoveries, metaphysical, were found value in the density of energy contained when this was burned to apply to turbines and engines. Man, this all of a sudden became a blessing. Does that mean we should always be dependent on that black stuff? No, not at all. But you always have to make those leaps. So Russia, China, India are definitely committed to that type of system of self-perfectibility, and it's not based upon some utopian and they're not being angels trying to put their blessings onto Africa and other poor countries that have suffered abuses. They're simply saying it's in our actual self-interest to help you. And that's a fact. You're going to have better business. You're going to make more money. You're going to be more secure when people don't hate you, but they like you because you've helped them access abundant food and water and jobs that are qualitative. The fact of life. And America and the Western world used to have more of a sensibility of that before I was born, and probably before many of us here were even born. And we lost it. We went kind of crazy. Somewhat by design, somewhat by our own folly. And now we're in a situation where, we forgot how we defeated this new world order in the last century. Like I could count, as you pointed out, Billy Bob, I alluded to these 3 different moments when the new world order almost succeeded. It came close in in the wake of World War I, a completely manufactured war that had no reason to world war. There was, even today, the best historians will not be able to give students of history a viable reason why World War I happened, because it's just like the war that just kind of steamballed out of control after some Archduke got killed.
It wasn't the Archduke,
yeah. So
read Karl Kraus. I recommend everybody read The Last Days of Mankind.
Who's Karl? I never read Karl Kraus.
He published the Feckle for many diffades.
Okay.
And he was a satirist in Vienna. It's really it's black humor, but it's really brilliant. And just as a sidelight, the complete last days of mankind. I had it right here. It's brilliant. I just finished it a couple of months ago. There's a translation, and it's been remaindered, and you can now pick it up for around $14. It was something like $60 or $70, just to boost the sales of the two brilliant translators who I can't remember. But if you want to understand World War I recommend you read Karl Kraus, not the historian.
What's his angle? Like, what's he provide as a unique insight?
What he would talk about the material idiocy that was the kind of delusional material idiocy that dominated European culture at the time, and how people basically lived in a kind of atmosphere of unreality toward themselves and toward everything else. It was that the ironies of life were just simply missed by these humorless culture in general. I don't want to go off too much.
No, I get it though. No,
Yeah.
it's a strong cultural diagnostic, which sounds
I just published a poem because I wanted to read. I had the selection. It wasn't doing for me, so I bought the complete and I read it. And I just published a poem about a guy who writes to Karl Kraus, who's lost a leg and an arm and an eye in World War I, and his whole thing is, I'll just part of it is, now I'm ready to go back into society when I've recovered for my new occupation, that is begging on the streets of Berlin. So there was this no sense of what was going to happen on the other end of starting this kind of conflict.
Yeah.
And because people have become so materially delusioned, at least the upper and middle classes.
Yeah.
So I can't really summarize it, but it's,
no, you don't have to. You don't have to. But that's the key thing, because oftentimes people, and it's important to look at the conspiratorial operations and machinations behind the scenes of history, which are very typically overlooked by like mainstream standard theory historians who are not supposed to pay are not supposed to acknowledge the actual causal nexus of history, which is the domain of intentions, conspiracies, for good or for bad. It's not just bad.
Not to. Yeah.
You know? And they're taught that that's not scientific historical research. You should just look at the material expression of the events that happen on a timeline and impose your coloring onto it. You know, it's very liberal. And the reality is, though, like, history is shaped by ideas, intentions, machinations, but at the same time, those bad conspiracies, like the conspiracy to initiate World War I, which was a conspiracy from Anglo-American, principally at that time, Anglo intelligence operatives, utilizing their different networks of controlled, terrorist cells like the Serbian Black Hand, which was deployed to carry out a disturbance. But also, you had these like backdoor military agreements, like the Entente Cordiale, that set things up in a perfect way that pulled Germany into a trap. So, but the way that these things work is because they couldn't work if you didn't have a decadent, dumbed down populational process. So people often they tend to look at one or the other, and they ignore the fact that they work together. That this is how the oligarchy gets away with things, because if you can get people so hedonistically, sensually obsessed with their momentary happiness and pleasure, such that they don't really take the time to think about the broader wave of history that came, let's say, even before that was shaping things before they were born, or the consequence of their action or inaction that will reverberate after they die to their kids, grandkids. If they stop thinking about these things, then they become essentially perfect, malleable idiots who will go along with whatever any demagogue or popular opinion manipulator wants them to think as far as shaping the zeitgeist. And they won't believe in conspiracies. They'll say, "Oh, you conspiracy theories, that's dirty talk. I don't believe in that. I'm too smart." And it's like, well, then you can't discover who's actually putting thoughts in your head and getting you to like walk in lockstep into a war.
Briefly go back to DeFeco.
Whereas we're Putin bots, but I think the break should be coming up, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess we'll go to a break.
In a world where the quality of information available to poorer communities is doctored, tainted and sometimes regressive, where the words fake news have come to mean other people's opinions, it is vital to rely on news platforms with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your product and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the website they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our news site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
We're back from break. We're streaming live with the Foreign Policy Review. Our special guest is Matt Ehret. We are just discussing the World War I and how that came about, and how, you know, we're taught in high school history class or college history class for that matter, how it came about, and the disconnect between, you know, how it actually came about and what we're told. So Carlo, go right ahead.
Because Matt triggered something in my head. In the Feckle, he talks about a woman, Miss Shekel, and she was a photographer and a reporter at the time, and she candy coded everything that she photographed and reported for the Die Freie Presse, which was the major press, the free press in Vienna, and this gave the public the illusion that even as the Habsburg dynasty was losing the war, that they were somehow winning it, and which is there's an interesting parallel between Ukraine right now and what Krauss was presenting. So I think that it's and what's interesting about it is, and the woke people will hate this, is that Shekel, she was considered the first woman combat photographer, and that's what she's known as, and that's her reputation, and she gets all kinds of attention, especially in Europe, for that position. Books are written about her and all that stuff, and yet at the same time she was a total fucking liar. Just lied about World War I, bald-faced lies. So
it triggered me as well. A couple of things that I think I learned from one of Matt's podcasts was in Africa. I think they call it the Wetiko mine virus. In the Arab world, it's known as the new Jahiliya. This curse of rabid individualist consumerism, and it really puts the mind to sleep. You know, in Europe, most of my friends, they're planning vacations, they're playing little Star Wars games on their phone, and everything is fine. In the meantime, the whole continent, you know, it's being deindustrialized. The economy is going down. You know, the NATO thing is being emptied, but they're put fast asleep. And I think that's sort of what you alluded to with this. You know, I really love your metaphors, like breathing cows in the medieval ages, like know your place. That's what you're supposed to do. I really love that one.
That's the electric fence of the mind, right? The concentration camp without tears that Aldous Huxley talks about. It really is that in his famous, I think it's a Stanford speech that he gives to a bunch of wannabe alphas who want to like have a good position in his upcoming Brave New World. And he's pretty much just saying in 1960, you know, people say, oh, was Aldous Huxley was a prophet warning us of the dangers of what would happen if we give up our liberties. And it's like, yeah, that's one interpretation. Or you can actually read what he says in Brave New World Revisited, where he literally says how great it is and how effective it is that they found his soma in the form of LSD-25, and how much more effective it is actually to get the effects he desires in a malleable population. Or in this speech I'm citing right now, right before he dies, where he describes how, an oligarchy, the rule by a hereditary elite, has always existed, and we can presume it always will exist as a universal constant. And so what we should do is prepare the groundwork to try to, help people adapt to the reality of this forever model, utilizing, of course, what he's promoting with doors of perception and other things, and talking a bunch to all these wannabe social engineers about what their responsibilities will be and the opportunities for them as far as becoming auxiliaries for this new beast. And, what he was doing with his brother, he just had bad eyesight, so he couldn't go into the sciences. But, that was his brother's assignment, Julian, as the treasurer of the British Eugenics Society, and then its president. He had his assignment to create some sort of a weird neo-Darwinian cult for the elite, aka transhumanism, which he co-founded with Pierre Teilhard de Chardin in 1954. That served as sort of the ideological matrix that would capture the useful, wannabe alpha pluses of the oligarchy, aka Davos later on, and all of these little like swamp creatures that emerged onto the scene. And all this was just playing a dual role as a cultural warrior, preparing predictive programming and preparing the groundwork, along with MK Ultra, along with Tavistock and these other operations that he was highly enmeshed in, to advance this new sick culture that would target, again, not only the elites, but also the population, obviously, more at large, to make us all much more mushy, post-truthy, and much more malleable or adaptable to the type of unnatural conditions that his handlers wanted to bring about for the world, which is, again, completely unnatural. It's a defiance of any of the laws of nature that we can find, either moral or physical. This is in opposition to all of that stuff.
There's a deep irony you touched on here. Shockley, a eugenicist, invented the transistor, and Sidney Gottlieb, for the CIA, introduced LSD into the American culture. So you've got to talk to my young musician friends. You've got to, but they don't get the irony of how complex the world situation is to them. To them, LSD is still an opening of the mind, and when they get up before the mic, just out of their minds on LSD, they're speaking through something that a guy invented who believed that Africans and anyone of a black race or dark race was inferior. And how do you deal philosophically with those ideas? And how do they comport with their art, with the art that they produce? I'm tired of talking to them about it. They don't want to listen to me. Some old that, obviously back in the day probably was complicit.
I never studied Huxley. What I learned about Huxley, I learned from Facebook memes. I assumed he was a dissident. I had no idea he was like a proponent. That shows my level of research in Huxley. Going back to World War I, I think me and Ben, we are both big proponents of the class paradigm and the overriding primacy that oppositional class interests has on, history's big events. So World War I, obviously, World War II, and how, a lot of it is driven by an antagonism to socialism, as socialism being a threat to the established order. And what are we going to do? And wars are great. Wars are great to kill socialism and to kill revolutionary spirits in the population. I think Jacques Pauwels, he does some great, history through the class analysis, and he would be who I recommend to read about World War I. Ben, do you have any? You want to champion the the primacy of class analysis?
World War One, the end of World War One, gave birth to the Soviet Union, and every European project, I think, whether mixed with American intentions, basically it was, or just alone, was an anti-communist, anti-Eastern project, including the entirety of World War II. It's to kill, subjugate Slavs. And today is the 80th anniversary of the victory at Stalingrad, basically. 2 million people died there, which I can't imagine. We had a festival in Peach, like a big commercial with lights and everything. And I think the newspaper reported there was 20,000 people here. And I don't have agoraphobia, a fear of masses, crowds, but I had it then. I just had to leave. It was just too much. Now, imagine 100 times that on a battlefield, dead. Not all the fighting, those are the casualties. That happened 80 years ago when the tide was turned back. And today at, I think it's called the Mamayev Kurgan Memorial in Volgograd, now it's called, the grandson of Charles de Gaulle was there, Pierre de Gaulle. And he made this speech, which just a short one, I'm going to sum it up, which to me was amazing. An opinion exists in the West to its superiority over the Russian people. I also shatter this illusion of superiority. The West is completely ignorant about the Russian people. So the crisis in Europe right now is rooted in this. They are blind to the love of their homeland, to the resistance of the Russian people. Therefore, this misunderstanding spawns great instability. One day the truth will prevail. That's the grandson of Charles de Gaulle.
Mm-hmm.
But the main point I took away from Matt's previous one was, while people are sort of asleep and in their places, the world is changing. It's drastically like tectonic shift. It's rearranging itself. And the latest we can get into that to me was Iran, which I studied for the last 2 days. I wrote about it, but we don't have to. That was my quick addition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that most certainly the problem right now is the inability to put oneself into the shoes vicariously of the other, and instead what we see is just all sorts of Freudian projection of our own biases and what wishful thinking of what we desire the world to be, that we then start acting in accordance to, rather than looking at the world as it is, or looking at Russia and the Russian hearts and Russian psyche, or the Chinese hearts, psyche, culture as it actually is. So you have this delusional suicidal modality of setting foreign policy on a variety of levels, whereby these self-flattering technocrats who are trying to manage, I mean, these people have no life experience. They went straight from, poli-sci, MBAs, PhDs, they went straight into think tanks, went straight into government, went straight into NATO, went straight into the Atlantic Council, RAND, whatever, and then found themselves shaping policy. These people are idiots. They have no
often in the US and then holding office in Europe, like Ursula von der Leyen. The Russian economy is in tatters, the ruble is rubble.
Yeah.
No, it isn't.
No, it's not. These are people who are really they drink their own Kool-Aid, and this is where, in one sense, I think the intelligentsia of Russia, of China, of their allies, are able to take advantage of the insanity of the Kool-Aid drinkers, the self. They fed Kool-Aid to their victims, and then they started drinking it themselves. And it's like, well, that's useful because it makes them, at least while they're crazy, kind of predictable. So there's that. That is useful. On the other hand, it does make them more dangerous in some ways too, because they still have access to the nuclear arsenals. And for me, like when somebody, I think Billy Bobby asked earlier, like, what are the chances of this unipolar rules-based order succeeding? I think it's like slim to none. I agree with Ben. This is probably closer to none. But the thing that could really derail or set back the flow of the historical forces of civilization would be the unleashing of the nuclear armadas. I don't think that that's likely, but it gets more likely when you tie it to crazy desperation. And yeah. Russia, I mean, people have been led to believe increasingly there's been a rehabilitation of Nazis across the board, to the point that Stalin is being seen by many people amongst the liberal West as more evil than Hitler was, or at least commensurate, as was Mao. So people say like Mao, Stalin, and Hitler, as if how could you say that? Mao and Stalin led in the fight that absorbed, 85 or more % of the German Wehrmacht was absorbed by Russia, led by Stalin, that suffered 25 or 30 million deaths, casualties. China, 10 million. Most of that heavy lifting was Mao. Chiang Kai-shek was almost useless. in the fight against the Japanese fascists. And this is the reason why we didn't have a fascist transhuman New World Order back in the 1940s. The reason why that did not succeed was because of Stalin and Mao. That's the reason why we're not all goose stepping, learning. We are starting to goose step with its own, I guess, in some way. But by and large, it bought us a hell of a lot of time to do a lot of good that we could feasibly still do to derail this momentum into a new, feudal dark age. But people don't realize just what exactly happened that gave birth to the best movements that put down fascism and, won us a degree of liberty that we've chosen. I mean, we were dumb enough to take in the drugs, to take in the fake, the fake social engineering cultural matrix that really became hegemonic with the don't trust anyone over 30 drug, sex, rock and roll insanity of the 60s that gave birth to several generations of more and more malleable, softer and softer.
To us, hardcore communists, that's when the US left died. It was the hippie movement. But to us, I mean, to me personally, I'm not speaking for Billy Bob, but that was the death of the traditional US left,
It took a hit.
The class-based one.
Yeah. No,
Billy, a lot of those people
Carlo doesn't agree? No.
No, I'm going to let that pass.
Sorry.
He's probably right.
A lot of those people went on to found, the Silicon Valley big corporations who they swore against previously. It was weird. But I want to piggyback on your point just to say I read this one headline. I rarely read it, but there's the Kiev Independent. I'm sure you know what it's like. And it was Putin is to reopen new camps on the eve of the 80th anniversary. It implies that the Russians were the one who built the camps in World War II, not the ones who liberated them.
No.
That's just the insanity of it. I mean, soon enough, Stalin was the one who built the camps. Soon enough, that's going to be the reality in most of Europe if these people succeed.
When I saw the ADL coming out supporting Azov, I was like, okay, we've hit a new low here. We're in a... And they were like, yeah. We know that the Azovs have had a Nazi problem in the past, but we're pretty sure that that's over now. And now they're just freedom fighters against the new Nazis who are the Russians. It's like, you're the ADL. You attack everybody for being Nazi just for criticizing George Soros. And now you're defending the Nazis?
And do you know who was invited to the memorial at Auschwitz?
No.
The Germans, the ones who built it, the Poles, obviously the ones who worked there, and the Ukrainians. Not Russia who liberated it. And it was 2 years ago that David Dushman, the last liberator of Auschwitz, died. It was not invited, sorry. Not the Olympics, but history.
And Newland said that the Azov was no longer Nazi because, my gosh, they were absorbed into the regular military in Ukraine. And we gave them training. We just denazified them for you. Yeah, I'd like to see the program for that. My God,
I can't cite.
Well, never mind. I'm sorry.
I can't cite this perfectly, but after February, maybe March last year, when this whole thing began, I remember a lot of photos on the Kiev media and also Telegram about this one black guy we have in Azov, so we can't be that bad. And I was just thinking, what would it be like to be that one black guy in Azov?
Well, Gray Zone, Aaron and Max just published an article about how Ukrainians, when they moved to London, I think McCord has reported this too, they can't adjust to the fact that there's so many foreigners there and they want to leave. They're Muslims. They're racist. They're just purely deep down racist. They've been conditioned to be racist. They just fear people of color. So
I wanted to just add on to what Matt was saying about Stalin and Mao. They were great working class heroes. I always call them great Americans, but I just say that to piss off the Fox News crowd. It's true that at the end of World War II, the U.S. accounted for about half the world's population and 5% of the world's population, and then half the global economy. Right. And that was really because of the communist sacrifice of the Soviet Union and China. So the communist sacrifice in World War II allowed the United States to have this preeminence post World War II that they really exploited, you know, and misused. Like the U.S., the West has misused their position of fortune coming out of World War II, and you know, to create this empire, to try and go after this new world order, this full spectrum dominance that the Pentagon euphemistically calls it. But yeah, it's going to fail, and the quicker the U.S. and the West can start cooperating with Russia and China, and start, you know, working on win-win kind of, you know, prosperity, you know, development, you know, developing the underdeveloped world, win-win trade, prosperity in Africa, Central America, South America. That's what needs to happen. I mean, we need to just stop with the zero-sum game and the confrontation. But we need all ideologies need to unite around this anti-imperialism. And Matt, no, this has been a great discussion. So we're still not done. We got another 10 minutes.
Okay. I would just back up exactly what you said. And I think one of the most important things is that we cannot understand the future by any type of practice that's been a little bit too commonplace over the past decades, which is taking linear extrapolations of present trends and just assuming that we can just continue that in a linear way into the future and then talk about the future. People talk about, oh, what the world's going to be in 2040, 2050. No, we're facing now, we've surpassed a boundary condition. There's a breakdown shockwave, the likes of which are maybe they parallel in some qualitative degrees, but the scope is much bigger because there's 8+ billion of us now on the earth. The system is a lot, you know, they say the higher you are, the harder you fall. But it's still similar to what we saw in Weimar 1923 Germany, but that was a little bit more on a contained, localized scale. It's tied a little bit. You could say it has many similarities to the type of systemic breakdown of 1929 in America that spread globally. But of course, this has its own characteristics too. It also has hyperinflationary money printing associated with the speculative bubbles upon bubbles that are all melting down. All that to say, the things we take for granted, the supply chains, other things that we take for granted are not necessarily going to be there. There will be a shock to this system, the likes of which people can't even imagine because there's no living experience in human history of this in a full way like what we're about to experience. That being said, that could be a good thing, because when you are a little bit too decadent, complacent, and lacking of basic, you know, human qualities of moral reasoning that we've subjected ourselves to for too long, you kind of do need a bit of a slap of reality. That being said, if there were no multipolar intercivilizational alliance right now, creating a viable, functional alternative to the collapsing order that we're living under, we'd be really in a bad place. I probably wouldn't be spending my time talking and writing. I would be probably more depressed, doing something much more useless. However, we do have this other thing right now we've never had in human history either, which is Russia, China, Iran, India increasingly, who all want to survive, thrive, and create something viable, and they have a pretty good sense of the enemy and their tricks. So that's really good, and they've created this open system, continuously offering the West, the United States, Canada, Europe, opportunities to do business with them, to join, to get out of this collapsing Titanic and work with something that floats. The offers will continuously be there, despite the fact that things could get a bit hot. And so I think that if the American population didn't have a Great Depression, I'm thinking to myself, could they have accepted the types of reforms, radical reforms, that Franklin Roosevelt had brought in with the New Deal, with breaking up the banks, putting bankers in jail, unleashing government credit for building big projects? I don't think so. I don't think the decadent Roaring '20s population would have had the moral capability of understanding, let alone the elite class, who also, many of them were also, you know, flushed. They didn't have the ability to accept those types of changes that required that bit of pain. Fortunately, you got a Roosevelt and you didn't get like an American Nazi, which could have happened too. That would have also been bad. So I think if we prepare the groundwork now with all voices, left, right, center, whoever, anybody who's human, not ideologically governed like all of the convergence of the left and right towards the pro war fanaticism of Holmes. I'm just distracting myself with my fuzzy lens. Oh well, it's gonna
lost focus. Yeah.
There we go. Here, let's get my forehead in there. Yeah, that worked out. Okay, that was weird. So yeah, if we can get an actual citizens movement going that is principled, like we see it in Germany with what's her name, the Sarah Wagenknecht of the left organization, what's called the Die Linke.
Die Linke.
Die Linke. Yeah, that's one good example of somebody who's attracting all of so many people who you would not expect would ever support a common party, left, right, people who would normally not be in the same room together, are all converging because she's the only one clearly giving a solid voice to the anti-war movement and calling for positive relations with the East. We need this in America badly because we're going to go through a crisis if we don't have if everybody who's awake to the Great Reset danger are all into decentralized, like if that's the only thing is just all we can do is cut ourselves off the grid, go Amish, which is a big problem amongst the resistance right now, is everybody is just like atomizing themselves into thinking like, okay, I can only do good by saving me and my little local family and maybe a little mini community group by growing food. It's like, if that's how you're thinking, you're not going to be able to carry out any actual viable resistance to this oligarchy, which is a highly centralized power structure with a lot of power, which will love it if you divide and conquer yourself. They would adore that. So you need to have people who can actually bring about a demand for joining the Eurasian partnership and all of the other projects that are viable that we can work with. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry I rambled.
No, that's fine. Because we have 2 minutes left. I want to get to Bannon, and you just segued into it. When we talk about Ukrainians going to Britain and being racist, the people they sound like are my uncles and my cousins. And there's been a lot of talk about MAGA communism here, between some Hinkle and Haas and these idiots. But I wonder what and that's Bannon talk. And I wonder how you feel about the notion that there can be a link between people on the far left and people on the far right, even though Bannon talks about a white Christian nation. So I want to leave it at that.
There's so much to say.
In 2 minutes,
but I only have 2 minutes. All I can say is Bannon.
I'm back. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bannon is somebody who has been deployed to try to create a controlled opposition to the Great Reset. He's got his own anti-Soros right wing, the movement foundation that he tried to create. It didn't really work out, but they're still trying to bring it online as a way to create an umbrella organization to unite the right under this, what in my interpretation is effectively the preparation for a new ideological crusade against China and against the Muslim world. It again hasn't really gotten off the ground, but if the crisis conditions can be met and people are desperate enough and destroyed enough, they might be inclined to be radicalizable enough to go into something like that reacts against the critical race theory, post-truth corruption. So it's again both two sides of the same outcome. Bannon is tied to some major Habsburg Jesuit operations, which is the topic of a whole show unto itself. I've written a lot about this, tied to what Otto von Habsburg was running out of this old monastery in Italy called the Dignitae Humanae Institute. Really, really insidious black nobility stuff set up after the Fourth Crusade. And it's really, like I said, a cult. It's with a fascist heart and a Christian Catholic veneer, but it's really fake. It is the old school feudal Catholic thing that they want to restore back into this whole neo-feudal architecture ultimately. And he's a useful idiot. I don't think he's even aware of what he's a part of. And it's good that Trump kicked him out and fired him early on, but he's still trying to rally anybody from the soda MAGA groups that I think are viable are being disorganized by that. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you for coming, man. We've run out of time.
Matt, that was a great show. We will definitely have you back. Everybody, thanks for watching. We will be here next Thursday at noon Eastern time. I'm at 7 a.m. Hawaii time. Thank you very much.
Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you.